today I'm joined by John Mason, the MSP for Glasgow Shettleston. Today we'll be primarily discussing the buffer zones that were first introduced in 2024. These laws prevent anti-abortion protesters from gathering within 200 metres of a clinic, and they were introduced by Green MSP JD Vance. So, John, you've been a vocal opposition to this. You tweeted that you were very disappointed when the law came into action. So I was wondering if you could just expand on this and maybe explain why you're the only MSPs to vote against it.
Okay, yes, happy to give you some comments. I mean, the starting point, I suppose, with abortion is really when does life begin? And I mean, we used to debate that when I was at school, which is quite some time ago. But, I think I've become convinced over the years, really for quite a long time, that life begins at conception. So obviously the main alternative is that life only begins at birth, and it's not a baby a day before the baby's born, but or somewhere in the middle. But there seems to be there's no kind of clear-cut logical place to say life really begins at this point unless it's at the point of conception. So that then leads on to my belief, and others, I'm not the only one, that from the point of conception, we're dealing with two people here. We've got the mother and we've got the baby. And the baby's obviously very small to start with, gradually grows, and at 23 weeks now, quite a few babies are surviving if they are born prematurely. So it's because I believe, and others believe, that there are two people involved in this, that we are, first of all, concerned about abortion, and then secondly, concerned about the buffer zones. I mean, I know that some people would be against abortion, but are actually quite happy about the buffer zones. So there's a kind of mixture in here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was unhappy, and I did vote against the buffer zones. And as it turned out, I didn't know at the time, but as it turned out, I was the only MSP to vote against.
Had you had any vocal support from any of the other MSPs? So were you quite surprised by the result?
Well, I knew that some of the other MSPs are pro-life, and either for different reasons didn't vote. I mean, for example, the Conservatives, as I understand it, told their MSPs just not to vote at all, not to abstain, not to vote against, but just not to vote. So you'll see if you look at the Conservative MSPs who didn't vote, there would be one or two of them I think would be sympathetic to my position. Well, I mean, there's a whole range. It used to be Labour had a number of, because they used to have a very strong Catholic connection, and a number of them would have been very strongly pro-life, but I think they have kind of pushed out anyone who's got that position now.
Would you say that you've held these views for a long time? Have you grown up from a place of faith, or is it more like a moral kind of?
Well, I mean, I came to faith. I was brought up in a kind of formal church, and it's it was just tradition and things. But I came to personal faith, I would say, when I was about 13, 14, that kind of age group. So that's when faith became more important to me. And I do accept that a lot of people of faith are pro-life, and a lot of people who are pro-life have faith. On the other hand, as I was saying, I think the question of when does life begin is more of a scientific or a medical question. It's less of a faith question. I mean, faith can't, in a sense, decide when life begins. But yes, the two are interlinked. And I think my faith gives me, I would say, courage to speak up for people who don't have a voice.
And in terms of the morality of it, would you have any exceptions for cases of rape or incest or child abuse?
Yes, I mean, I think these are very, very difficult ones, and I'm not going to march up and down and dictate what people should do in that situation, or if the mother's health is at risk, for example. I'd be very sympathetic to a family or a mother if she was having to make the choice of either her life or the baby's life. Having said that, I do have friends where that did happen. The mother was diagnosed with cancer while she was pregnant and refused to have treatment because it would harm the baby. And the baby survived and she died. So I've got tremendous respect for somebody who makes that decision, but that has to be their decision. But I think my main concern is that the vast majority of abortions in Scotland, the mother is perfectly healthy, the baby is perfectly healthy, and there's no good reason for the abortion other than the baby's inconvenient, or maybe there's financial pressures, maybe there's other reasons, maybe the partner, the family is pressurizing the woman to have an abortion. There's lots of reasons for an abortion, but they're not necessary from the point of view, like the examples you give of a that somebody's health, the mother's or the baby's, is seriously, or rape or incest or some of these kind of things. And then of course you get the question about what happens if the baby might be disabled. As you may know, one of my colleagues in the Scottish Parliament, Jeremy Balfour, is disabled, and his mother, I think, would have known that before he was born, and yet he is a trained lawyer, a trained church pastor, and now a very able politician. So, there are big risks with this. If you were to say, for example, that the baby is quite severely disabled, that we lose some very valuable people in that process.
Recently, coinciding with Lent, the 42 Days for Life organisation has started protesting again outside the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, but exactly 200 metres away. I'm just wondering, what do you think about this, considering, as you said, that you wouldn't try and dictate if it was somebody who'd had a rape or was a victim of incest or child abuse? If these protests are there, how are they supposed to know which acceptable and which they wouldn't, if they're just kind of protesting to everyone?
Well, I suppose in the first place, they would probably say they're not protesting, and they would say they're carrying out a vigil, because most protests I know tend to be quite loud and noisy, and having visited that particular vigil twice, it's very quiet and peaceful. And even before, it was at a fair distance away from the hospital, and now it's even further away. So they would say that both lives matter and that they're concerned about the baby. But it's entirely up to people. People can ignore them. There's more than one entrance to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. You don't have to go past them in order to get into the hospital. So I would say it's quite passive, if you like. They're not actively trying to engage with people. They're just standing there. Yes, they're praying. Yes, they might be doing readings, that kind of thing. But it is pretty peaceful compared to what I would consider a normal protest. So I wouldn't say they were targeting anyone. We know that there's a fair number of people, I don't know if we know exactly, who are being pressurised by their partner or their family to have an abortion. That the woman herself does not want an abortion, but she is being pressurised coerced into having an abortion. And in that case, that would be an opportunity for her to go to these people and seek help.
If, for example, a woman was going for an abortion and it was quite a difficult decision for her, however, she was quite set in stone, can you see how it would be quite upsetting to see people praying? And maybe whilst silently, it does sort of they could see it as passing as sort of judgment, maybe?
Well, they're saying they disagree, but I mean, this is a free democratic society. We're allowed to disagree, or we should be allowed to disagree. And I suppose that's quite a fundamental point. And there's other people who, they whatever their view on abortion, they're against this kind of censorship, buffer zones, all this kind of thing, because we should be fair. Of course, it's a very personal thing. I get that, but if we're going to have a society where you are not allowed to express an alternative opinion, even on something sensitive like abortion, I think that is quite concerning, and I wonder where it would go from then. What other subjects will we not be allowed to protest about? I mean, we're having a debate on assisted dying. Now, if that was to be approved, does that mean we can't protest against it? Or if it's not approved, does that mean people can't argue for it?
I think that ties quite well into another one of the things I wanted to discuss. So you've probably seen JD Vance did a speech at the Munich Security Conference, and he basically referenced the buffer zones, and he said that across Europe, but mainly in Britain, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And this was in direct reference to the buffer zones. How do you feel about maybe an American influence on this like quite personal debate in Scotland?
Well, I mean, everybody's entitled to comment on everything, and most of us are commenting about America at the moment, and Donald Trump in particular. So I guess they're entitled to comment on us. I mean, I think he was inaccurate in what he was saying, and I do not have a lot of time, I have to say, for Mr. Vance or for Mr. Trump, but so they were kind of exaggerating, in my opinion, and being a bit extreme. But I think we are in a very international world. We are I comment on freedom of religion, for example, around the world. I comment on China oppressing minorities. So frankly, if the Americans or anyone else want to comment on us, and America's very split on this as well. So I mean, we know it's internationally it's quite a controversial subject, and I think almost in every country there'd be people who were on both sides.
That's really interesting. I think it's quite fascinating how, whilst the debate in America is quite different, there is quite a lot of influence here. Like the SPUC is quite active in Glasgow. I think you've been to one of their...
Yes, I work very closely with them.
They have had £73,000 in US donations from 2022 to 2024. Would you like to see more of an American kind of attitude towards abortion, where it is less accessible? Roe versus Wade was overturned.
No, I don't want our politics to follow America's politics in any level, really. And I think when it comes to abortion, I mean, there's been actual violence in America, and I think that's partly why the buffer zones were introduced. So they were introduced in Scotland to deal with an American problem, whereas there had been no trouble to speak of in Scotland. The police said had never been any problems around abortion hospitals. So no, I don't want us to go down the American route. You've quoted a figure, obviously, and if Spock agree with that, that's fair enough. I mean, I imagine that's quite a small part of their budget. They have quite a team of staff and things. So, as I understand it, most of the Spock funding would come from donations from just ordinary people in Scotland, England, and so on. But again, if the Americans want to comment on what we're doing, of course, I mean, people are interacting in journalism and about Ukraine and all sorts of things. We're discussing them with Americans. So yes, there's a lot of interaction. We all speak much the same language. But no, I wouldn't want to copy the American political or abortion scene at all.
Yeah, I do think it is probably more volatile there. I guess I do see how the buffer zones, since considering a lot of UK politics has somewhat recently sort of followed a trend in kind of following America. Could you see how that could be like quite a useful thing to implement, just kind of prevent kind of more extreme values to be inflicted on like quite vulnerable people in society, like someone getting an abortion?
Well, I don't know what you mean inflicted on or whatever, but I mean, again, we should have the freedom to speak out and disagree with each other, whether it's over this issue or a host of other issues. But yes, absolutely. I mean, there mustn't be, we've got hate crime law, for example. You're not allowed to stir up hatred against other groups. You certainly can't be violent. In Scotland, we've got the breach of the peace, so that can cover quite a lot of things. So as I say, I don't think there had been a problem in Scotland, and I think those who supported the bill, Gillian Mackay and others, failed to show that there had been a problem in Scotland. So I think they were more concerned that there could be a problem in Scotland in the future, or there is a problem in America, but I don't actually think there's really such a problem here. And the Roe v. Wade, which you mentioned, is more like the other way around. It's America copying us, because we already, in the UK, has said, well, it's not going to be a UK decision on abortion. It's going to be up to Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, and Wales, I think. So, in a sense, in Scotland, we've said it's up to the local government. And I think in America, therefore, they've copied us and said it's not going to be a US decision, it's going to be up to each state.
Mm.
So they're following us from that point of view.
As I said before, the 40 Days for Life organization has started their silent vigils again. Do you have any plans to go and join them for this next 40 days?
I haven't made any plans, no.
Mm-hmm.
It did cross my mind that I might.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the past, I've gone and visited and spent maybe half an hour with them
Mm-hmm.
a couple of times, and chatted to them and maybe taken part in a reading or something. So I will be reflecting on that, but I haven't made any plans.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, like, in terms of the 40 Days for Life demonstrations, do you think that they could actually change anyone's mind, or do you think it's more like they feel like it's their moral obligations?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you're coming from a position of faith, you believe that prayer matters, or prayer makes a difference, and I believe that prayer makes a difference. But if you're coming from a humanist perspective, prayer is a waste of time. So there's a little bit of an issue in there that I think it's very worthwhile praying. I personally am quite relaxed about where you pray about something. So if I want to pray about something, I can do that at home, I can do it in the church, I can do it as I'm walking down the street. So the place is less important, but I do accept that for other people, including other Christians, where you pray is quite important as well. So that's one side. And then another one is this idea of offering help to people. And I think they can give you examples. How many, I really do not know, but they can give you examples of where a woman was in two minds about having the abortion. She saw the people there and she went over to speak to them and decided against it. I mean, it has to be her decision, that neither they nor anyone else can force somebody. But where a woman is being pressurized for either by her partner who doesn't want a baby, or sometimes by the family. And I mean, one example is that in some families they prefer to have a boy, and if they know that it's a girl that's expected, they would want an abortion. So there's a host of different reasons for abortions, and where the woman is in two minds, or in fact maybe she knows herself she doesn't want the abortion, but she's under such pressure that she's going to have it, then I do believe that these vigils or protests can be a help.
In terms of safety for women, I assume you would rather abortion be illegal. Would that be an accurate statement?
Well, I was aged 10 in 1967 when it was brought in, so I certainly wasn't part of that. And I know there was a lot of problems before that. So, I mean, my first step would just be, I think there should be fewer abortions. So I'd like to see the age reduced. I mean, the 24 weeks is really out of date. That may have applied years and years ago, but I mean, if a baby can survive at 23 weeks, why are we allowing abortions up to 24? And there's just so many. I don't think even those who introduced the abortion legislation in 1967 thought there would be quite as many abortions as there are now. And the ironic thing is that we have an aging population. We do not have enough children in this country. Absolutely nobody should be forced to have a child. But given that these are, in my opinion, real living children, their lives should not be terminated in the numbers that they are. I think, one of my starting points would be that a woman who's pregnant and not sure about having an abortion or having the baby should have all the options laid out before her. And I'm not convinced that the NHS and at least some medics do give her all the options, like could she get financial help, could she give the baby up for adoption, all of these options as well as abortion. And I think some women, and some have said, I've heard women saying this, that once they said they were interested in abortion, then it was like they were put in a conveyor belt and there was no getting off.
Would you say that as maybe a non-religious woman going to have an abortion, the vigils could be seen as slightly intimidating maybe, or like if you knew there was no way of it changing your mind, it could have a negative impact on your mental health after the abortion, having to leave and see the protest is still there?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for Queen Elizabeth, but you do not have to go see the protesters and go by. So, I mean, you might see them the first time, or you knew about them, they've been in the media enough, and therefore you go use a different entrance to the hospital. So there are a number of options, but the mental health one is an extremely interesting one because, again, I've heard women who have had an abortion speak at spot conferences and elsewhere about the terrible impact that having an abortion had on their mental health. And in some cases for the rest of their lives, like 40, 50, 60 years, they never got over having the abortion because they had not been warned. And again, medicine nowadays, people have to make up their own minds. I fully accept that. But people should, if there's possible side effects from any procedure, be it a heart transplant or, taking aspirin or anything, people should be warned about that. And I think one of my criticisms, and not mine, but I mean other people who know more about it than I do, of the abortion services in this country is that they're not warning people that they may have a serious mental health problem after that. And in fact, frankly, not even just for women, because I was at a meeting a couple of years ago, and a guy came up to me at the end of the meeting and said he and his girlfriend had an abortion, like 40 years ago, and he has never got over it. Felt guilty all that time.
With the feelings of guilt, do you think that the anti-abortion protests would kind of exacerbate that? Like if his main qualm there was the guilt, possibly having to see such an active anti-abortion movement kind of rise in Scotland, would that not kind of bring out these feelings of guilt more?
Well, in a sense, I think it should, because terminating a baby, I think, is a bad thing, and so somebody should feel guilty about it. But again, let's remember we're talking about maybe a dozen older ladies, often standing at the side of a pavement, reading out prayers. They're not active in the sense of standing in your way or anything. And I mean, I fully accept. I mean, it's an issue which emotions run very high, and in one sense, almost whatever somebody does, there are risks. And I mean, mental health is much higher profile these days, and almost anything we can do have kind of mental health impacts. And of course, I want mothers and everyone else to be as healthy as possible, but at least I think people should be warned that yes, if they have, say, a disabled baby, then there are going to be challenges with that, and that's going to be difficult, maybe for the child, also for the mother. But if they have an abortion, there are repercussions with that as well, and some mothers get on fine and don't feel anything after that, but some do, and I don't think they're always warned about that. And that's the experience. We know people who have said they weren't warned.
Now to kind of just finish off and speak about your general career, there was some controversy last year about some things you tweeted about Gaza. Do you feel like now that you're out of the SNP, you are more vocal with your opinions? Do you feel like you feel less, I don't know, like
inhibited?
Yeah.
You mean on anything, on Israel, abortion, everything? I mean, the reality was I was still in the SNP when we voted on the buffer zones, and that was a free vote. So abortion has long been considered, as would assisted dying, for example, to be a free vote within the SNP, and traditionally has been in the other parties as well. And so when I voted, we were not whipped on the buffer zone. Clearly, I was the only one that voted against it, but we weren't actually whipped. It was a free vote. And to be fair to the SNP, they allowed me to speak as well in one of the debates, and I explained why I was voting against. So, I mean, in my heart, I'm still in the SNP. I don't feel well, I have been expelled, obviously, and I have been suspended, but I still feel very attached to them and committed to them. And if you look at my voting, generally, I'm voting with them, and I'm generally supportive of the government. But I'm slightly freer now, that is true, and I can say more. But on the issue of abortion, I think I always did say really what I believed. And so not being in the SNP does not really make a huge difference on that issue.
I don't have any notes on it, but when I was reading, didn't you get a like kind of warning about your abortion stance and maybe how vocal you were? I think around like 2022, if I remember correctly.
Right, I'm now struggling to remember. I mean, I've been warned over the years about a whole range of things. I mean, I was involved in the debate on same-sex marriage. I've been involved in debates in gender recognition, and obviously in abortion, and well, we had assisted dying before, so I was involved in that. So I've had various warnings. I'm struggling to remember exactly what warnings I got at particular times. But yes, I mean, there's always been some people who, do not think that the SNP should have a free vote on something like abortion because they see it as women's rights and women's healthcare. So it wouldn't be unanimous within the SNP or I think Labour or the Tories that something like abortion should be a free vote. So yes, there would be some people would be unhappy either what I said or the way I said it. But I mean, really, all my political life, I've been getting warnings for different things, and eventually it happened to be over Israel, which I think is slightly strange because I probably up. Things like the Equality Act in 2009 when I was an MP and I was involved in that. I know some people were not happy about my view on that. But all of these things we got through, and it was only when we started talking about Israel and Gaza that people got so upset or whatever that I was expelled.
In terms of like the controversy in your views around like gay rights and gender recognition and abortion, would you say that these all come from a religious perspective? And if so, how do you feel about the intertwining of like church and state? Do you think it's your responsibility maybe as an MP not to allow religion to influence your opinion so much when many in your constituency might not even follow a religion at all?
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think every politician probably comes to politics from some kind of angle. So say, quite a number of the Labour people, especially some of the SNP, would come from a trade union angle. So they would be clear that they were, really working, voting for better rights for workers, all of that kind of thing. And okay, so they wouldn't be representing everyone in the constituency because they'd also have employers in their constituency, self-employed, other people. But if that's their main thing. And yes, I mean, if you join a political party, and I joined the SNP, obviously, about 35 years ago, you have to be signed up to most of what that party wants. But certainly the SNP traditionally has been quite a wide party, and you could have all sorts of views: humanist, Christian, Muslim, whatever. And the reality is, if you take something like assisted dying, especially, which is quite, there's quite a balance in it. It's probably quite close. Yeah. And if I went around my constituent, I'd find quite a lot. I'd find some constituents who didn't care, but I'd find other constituents who were very strongly on one side or very strongly on the other side. And you can't obviously be both to them. Similarly, maybe I got half the vote, but then that means half the people, voted for Labour or Tory or whatever. So, no, once you're elected, you represent all the people, but you're not going to agree with all the people on anything, taxation, Orange Walks, Scottish independence, abortion, assisted dying, none of all of these things. So yes, I'm here to, if somebody comes to me with a housing problem or something like that, it doesn't matter what they think, I will help them with a housing problem. But if it's on some of these other issues where there's disagreement, I mean, I think as long as I've been open before I was elected, and I've always said I was religious, and actually the East End of Glasgow is possibly more religious than some parts. If it was in the West End, I think it'd be quite different. But when I was elected, especially as an MP, so I was an MP for 2 years, from 2008 to 2010, and it was a by-election, so it was very high profile, and we had a lot of TV and things around the by-election in 2008. Can't remember how many candidates there were, but I was the only one who was pro-life, and at the time we were also discussing embryology. So I said very openly, it was all over everywhere, TV, media, etc., that I was pro-life, I was against abortion and against embryology, and I was elected. So yeah, I don't know where exactly the majority of my constituents are on all of these issues, but either, certainly in 2008, either some of them totally supported me, even though they didn't like the SNP because of abortion, and others, it wasn't the major factor for them. So I think, to be honest, the number of people for whom abortion is the main factor is probably quite small.
Just to finish off, I'm kind of just wondering about your plans for the future. Would you stand for re-election? Would you try and become a member? No?
That's made up long before this. Well, not long before the abortion thing, because that's been going a long time. But long before I was expelled from the SNP, I had decided to retire. I'm currently 67. I'll be next year 68, nearly 69. Definitely time to retire. I've been in politics now for 27 years. I've been in the Scottish Parliament for 14. I think it's time for younger people to take over.
As a councillor, an MP and MSP, what has been your highlight of your career?
I don't know. I mean, from a purely political point of view, getting elected in 2008 as an MP was stunning and a huge privilege. And I mean, the East End of Glasgow had never had an SNP parliamentarian before. We had, well, when I was elected in 1998, there were very few councillors even. And so for us to win that seat from Labour in 2008 was absolutely amazing. And so that was a highlight, I think, politically. As for, what I'm actually doing, I mean, there's a lot of the day-to-day stuff here. When we get somebody at house, maybe they're overcrowded and we get them a bigger house, or they can't manage the stairs and they get a ground floor flat. People, it can turn people's lives around, and that's incredibly satisfying. So that kind of stuff as well. And I think as far as the parliaments are concerned, and even when I was in the council, just kind of challenging the fashion, challenging the establishment, if you like. I've seen that as my role, and I've found that, I think obviously it's not everybody does that. Some people become government ministers and things, which I haven't. But I think just questioning things, and I spend my life asking questions, and I think that's been the right path for me.
You say that younger people, it's time for younger people to take over. Would you see that going in a more kind of left-leaning, pro-choice way, or as I've seen, because as you know, I emailed you before I was investigating the pro-life groups in universities, could you also see young people kind of championing the beliefs that you hold, despite being from a younger generation?
Yes, I mean, I think society, I would accept, is becoming more liberal, if you like, socially less conservative. However, it's certainly not 100%, and there's, I know there's a lot of young people involved with SPUC and this kind of movement, and young people would have quite also a conservative view socially, on abortion, and they'd be opposed to assisted dying and some of these things. I mean, I think that goes up and down over the years, and I suppose I would hope there'd be a kind of more people would come to have a living faith, Christian faith, going forward. Some of the churches have a lot of young people in them, the one I go to, and others, whereas some, it's more older people. And now, so I think that's something that changes over time, and I believe in prayer, and so I hope that there'll be young people taking a firm view on the abortion and other questions. But I think that during most of my lifetime, people have become less religious and more, let's say, more liberal. And yet there's other aspects, just the very fact Reform is doing better as a political party, hopefully not in Scotland, but elsewhere, and some of the stuff in America, clearly a lot of young people are attracted to that kind of more traditional or right-wing agenda. So young people vary as well as older people.
I'm quite interested in your political beliefs, because from, I guess, from the media I consume and the politicians I follow, it's like quite easy to predict what they'd believe. But I was listening to a podcast that you were on. You said that less abortions and more immigration would be a good kind of future that you see. And I thought that was interesting, considering like a more right-wing belief would be less abortions, but also less immigration.
Yeah.
So I'm quite interested by that. And also, if you're not, like, how do you view reform? Because whilst they aren't very active on, like, maybe abortion issues, I would generalize that most of them would be more anti-abortion.
Well, I deplore reform for a host of reasons, but yes, the immigration would absolutely be one. I think we talked before about the difference between America and here, or let's say America and Europe. And in America, and clearly that's why Trump won, you've got this kind of connection between right wing on economic issues and things like that, and also on these, more conservative social values, or if you want to call them that. Whereas in Europe, it tends not to be the case. So most people, and it's certainly in Scotland that I know, but I've got a lot of friends, or had a lot of friends in the Netherlands and maybe Switzerland and other countries like that. You will find that they will have a traditional kind of conservative social values, so pro-life and against assisted dying, against some of the gender reform stuff. But on economic issues and that kind of side of things, they'd be much more on the left.
Yeah.
Which is where I see myself. So I don't like just that, you're either everything's on the left or everything's on the right. And I think in America it's quite hard because they've just got this two-party system. Whereas here, at least, there's a bit more of a mixture. And traditionally, the SNP, on all of that, so economically, and that's where, someone like Kate Forbes and myself would be closer on some of these social issues. But economically, she'd be much more to the right than myself.
Yeah.
And she'd be, I think, not being unfair to her, but, she really would emphasize business growth and things like that. Whereas I would be emphasizing higher taxes and redistributing income and wealth much more. So I would see myself to the left of the SNP on the whole. I've been arguing, and I'm going to argue for the next year as an independent, that I think taxes should be higher if we want better public services. I think both in the UK and Scotland, there's been politicians have been guilty of saying you can have lower taxes and good public services. And I just do not think the two equate. I'm an accountant. If we want better public services, better NHS, fewer potholes in the roads, then we have to pay higher taxes. And if we look at a country like Denmark, and Denmark have higher taxes and, on the whole, better public services. So I can see myself on the left on economic, these kind of terms. I'm very in favour of the Scottish Child Payment and the benefits that we're trying to make more generous in Scotland. But as you clearly know, I'm more, conservative, if you like, socially conservative on some of these other issues.
Yeah. Well, that was really helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.